What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. So today I'm really excited to deliver you my final tier list for Diablo 4 for all of the classes. This may determine what you want to play at the launch. Even if you have a favorite class, it may be smarter to actually start off with another class, as some of these classes will have a better early game, some of them will have a better late game. That said, I do have brand new information that I can share with you guys, and that is that we have played the review copy of Diablo 4, an NDA finally lifted, so as of today we can actually talk about that we were in the review copy of the game. Now, in terms of giving you guys gameplay of like the end game content of the review copy, that's actually going to be coming out later. There's an NDA until the 30th, so on the 30th I can share everything with you guys, but the video footage provided was from Blizzard. This is another version of the game that we technically couldn't record our own footage, but they provided footage for us, so it is higher level gameplay. At least you guys don't have to see level 20/25 gameplay again, so you have something at least nice to look at in the background while I go ahead and give you guys my tier list. So, starting right off, the most important thing with this is some characters are better early game and some characters are better late game. And that all comes down to, well, can you get some of these aspects earlier on? Because some of these aspects, they're amazing, like the Blood Mist one. If you've played the Necromancer, that thing is crazy good. However, there are other ones where you can actually unlock really early, like the Bloodbath aspect that you can get with the Necromancer to give you essentially a 40% more multiplier, which is actually huge. With, let's say for the example, you get this item that gives you a massive bonus. Some of these bonuses are actually going to be better or worse depending on if you put them on a two-hander or an amulet, if you can do so. So it kind of depends on that. So we're factoring all of these things in, especially with the Codex of Power and like when you can actually unlock these. So starting right off, let me go ahead and actually start off with the Necromancer, as Necromancer was 1000% in the very first beta that we were able to play. No one would disagree, it was the best class. Now, it did take a few nerfs, but then it got a buff. So it got a few different nerfs here and there, but Blood Surge, for whatever reason, hasn't been changed. Blood Mist, that you can activate essentially infinitely, has not actually been changed. It's just we lost some damage with Corpse Explosion, which kind of hurts the build, but for the most part, this is still one of the stronger builds in the game, even though the skeletons actually took a small nerf. So in the very beginning stages, it's kind of annoying to have to keep up your skeletons and try to make sure they are healthy enough so you don't have to keep on reactivating the button to give them that small amount of regen. It's kind of tedious to go ahead and do, but they are actually very powerful. I know a lot of people are all about Bone Spear because it applies vulnerability, but don't sleep on Blood Surge. Blood Surge has a way faster clear speed. Try it out, get the aspect, and you will see a night and day difference between the earlier game with the Necromancer. So for the first few levels of the Necromancer, I'm talking like 1 through 10, you do consistently have to keep up your skeletons. Again, it's something that can feel a little bit annoying, but very soon, literally once you get that Blood Surge, the class becomes incredibly strong. I would move it towards like the A tier in terms of like once you're like level 10. Once you have the Blood Mist and the Corpse Explosion, okay, we're talking like level like 20-ish, if you happen to get it as a drop because it's not on the Codex of Power, if you get that Blood Mist, Necromancer dunks on the entire game. You are immune to taking any damage. You are immune to any negative effect in the game because it cleanses everything and it makes you become what's called untargetable, which is one of the strongest things in the entire game because they can't target you. You literally cannot take damage and you're just corpse exploding as you're moving along. There is no class in the game that has anything that's even close to how powerful this actually is in the game, especially in the earlier stages. So if you can get that class by far is an S tier. It's not even in any competition once you have that power. Now, again, that's kind of RNG. Are you going to get that power? Who knows? But if you don't get the power, the Necromancer with Blood Surge, again, is still very strong. There's basically a 40% multiplier. Most of the other classes are going to get like a 20-30% multiplier, and on top of that, the Blood Surge activates twice, making it so you can actually become very tanky. This is not necessarily a build guide, but it's so incredibly powerful. With Necromancer, I know a lot of people felt like they did get nerfed, and they did, but they are still one of the strongest classes in the game. Again, once you hit like level like 15, 20, you're going to be breezing through content. But are they going to be like that in the late game? Well, stick around and find out. So next up, in terms of Druid, this is how I feel about Druid. The earlier stages in the Druid aren't really that bad anymore, so I'd put it anywhere from like B to C tier in the earlier stages. However, once you get some of the legendary powers, specifically getting the ability to have some of the elemental skills work properly, because a little tornado that just goes on its own path, it's not very fun. Later, when you can actually have it be more controlled on where it's going, it actually feels a lot better, and Druid becomes actually a little bit more powerful. But the thing is that if you compare the druids at clear speed compared to the other classes, especially in the earlier stages, it's nowhere near the other classes at the end of the day. So I'd still put it in the B tier for like the earlier stage of the game, but they become much more powerful with their keystone passive that can give them full resource instantly. It's one of the most powerful things in the entire game. That's more so in like the late game, but that's where I would put the druid for like the early game. Like, it's not anything special. Next up, I know a lot of people feel like Barbarian is like really bad earlier on, and I don't know why they have this perception. If you play Thorns Barbarian, okay, as long as you're playing Thorns Barbarian, they are incredibly, incredibly strong through the campaign, and I would easily put them in the A tier, no question about that. And the reason why is it's all about Thorns. If you have to walk up and hit the enemies and try to get your powers up, it takes a while. But if you just play Thorns and scale Thorns for the first few levels, and you could literally just pop a potion and grant yourself a massive amount of Thorns earlier on, and most of the trash in the game, we already dropped a video going over one of the best Barbarian build guides for beginners, and it's really good. Even if you're a veteran of the game, Thorns is incredibly overpowered earlier on, and that is because the flat numbers scale insanely well. So if you get anything that gives you extra Thorns, you can also put emeralds in your pieces of gear earlier on to get flat Thorns. It's kind of hard to get items that have Thorns earlier on, but if you can get it, it's really, really easy to make this class feel very powerful. The only downside with Barbarian is essentially fighting the boss. It does take significant more time, as sometimes a boss will literally just throw an AoE pool on the ground and then you have to fight them in the AoE. However, if you're playing Thorns, they're just going to do damage to themselves. So it actually is not that bad, and I still would consider Barbarian a very strong pick as long as you're playing Thorns. If you're like playing Upheaval, Whirlwind, whatever the case may be earlier on, you're going to run out of resource and it's going to feel bad. This is kind of more of a skill issue thing. If you know what you're doing with Barbarian, again, just literally go Thorns, copy my build. You'll have a super easy time. As long as you get that AoE on Thorns, there is something. This is actually for any of the classes. You can get something where Thorns does AoE damage around you. So the more enemies that are close to you, you get a 20 to 40% chance. I'd probably put this on a two-handed for Barb for Thorns because you can get an insane amount of damage, if I could spell right. With this, getting this to have double the effect, essentially, you can have, let's say, at the higher end, 80% chance to deal that damage all around you in an AoE. That is insanely powerful, especially when there's a elite and all the small things are next to it. It's going to be excellent. Barbarian, super strong. As far as the sorceress goes, as long as you get the enchant, and I really think Chain Lightning is still very powerful. You have one of the best mobility skills in the entire game. So earlier game, I would say sorceress is easily an A tier character, and the reason why is because, well, you're able to clear out things super fast with Chain Lightning. You don't really need a target. As long as it hits one, it's just going to bounce around, and it's a really easy, smooth leveling experience, and it's going to get more powerful as you progress, being able to get that enchantment. Sorceress is a very solid character overall. I'm bumping them down because I would have originally considered them S tier, but because of the insane amounts of nerfs to Hydra, and also because of the widescreen Hydra thing, that was really OP, that got nerfed as well. I'm going to put them in A tier. I think they are still very solid for leveling because, again, teleport compared to any of the mobility skills, that's where Necromancer kind of suffers too. But again, Necromancer, so good once you get that blood mist thing. There's nothing that compares with it for the early leveling experience. Now, one thing I do want to mention, because I was mentioning how good the mobility was with the Sorceress, Necromancer, even though it has terrible mobility, again, you could just roll through the game. Again, that blood mist thing is so good. And then over here, I want to talk about Rogue, which is a class that I actually plan to start with. I think Rogue is an S tier character at the start. The reason why is there are two really good aspects that you can get in the very beginning as a Rogue. So the two aspects that you should be looking out for, I really like Flurry. There is an insane amount of AoE that you can get with Flurry. So with this over here, can I put it over here? So maybe you guys can actually read it. All right, so with Flurry, oh, it just automatically puts it at the top. Anyways, you can see what it does. It says Flurry damages enemies in a circle around you. This radius is way bigger than the hitbox. This hitbox is insane. I can't wait to show you guys how good it is with some other footage that I have, but this thing is incredibly powerful. And you don't even need it for the multiplier of that like 15% increased damage. It's just so good because you can apply vulnerability to anything that has vulnerability already applied to it. It applies it to everyone. It's really powerful. I know a lot of people are all about the Twisting Blades. The reason why Twisting Blades is so strong earlier on the game, and it is really good, and you get it relatively early because you just need to go to Skosglen. The other Flurry one you can get literally in the very first act, but with Skosglen being a very close area that you can get to, yeah, getting this is really good. And the reason why Twisting Blades is so good, because it does hit okay for damage, and then it gives you another multiplier. But the reason why Twisting Blades is actually so good. It's actually because of the cooldown reduction that you can get, so you can apply more of your poisons. Poison is actually one of the strongest builds for the weapon enhancement. I know a lot of people like the Shadow, but the Shadow is basically just used to clear up trash, and if you have the Spinning Blades, you're going to clean up trash anyways. You might as well have better elite damage. Rogue is a class that has the best mobility in the game. I mean, if we look at the abilities that you have instant access to dash and shadow step. These are amazing. I mean, you get 50% increased movement speed. If you're doing the campaign, you want to speed run, this is excellent because you're just going to be teleporting towards the target and you just run and you just go past, going straight for the objective. If you want to do some of the forms of endgame content, some of the objectives, you guys have played even dungeons in general where you have to go grab an item and you just want to skip out on content, Rogue by far is the fastest. It is kind of a skill issue. You have to kind of know what you're doing, but at the end of the day, they have the best mobility. And if you're looking for like the best early game character in terms of speed, I would say Rogue is really high up there. The only reason why, again, Necromancer is here, the Blood Mist thing, I'm surprised that it honestly made it through the beta phases of the game where we got the server slam. Like, that Blood Mist thing, it's on another level when you compare it to anything else, because when you go through the campaign, or just play the game in general, right, there's going to be AoE slows on the ground, there's going to be things you have to watch out for. Necromancer, you push one button and you just corpse explosion detonate, and you just keep on doing it throughout the whole thing. It's mind-boggling how good that thing is. If you've gotten that legendary, you know what I'm talking about. So, this is for the early game. Now, does this change for the late game? Actually, yes, but in a surprisingly good way. So what are the main differences between the early game and the late game? So specifically getting access to a bunch of the uniques in the game. Now, as far as uniques go, there have technically been data mined. I've covered every single unique in the game. As far as that goes, let's go ahead and start off with Druid. Druid actually has one of the best key passives. So that's about at level like 30-ish when you'll get it. It depends if you're completing the Renown to get the extra skill points. But Druid actually has by far one of the most insane things in the game. I'm gonna link a video. It's kind of long, just as a heads up. It's like 30 minutes long, but if you just watch each individual class, they're like, you know, it's maybe like 6 minutes long per class, but it explains why the keystones are so powerful on every single one of these classes and which one has the biggest potential for insane endgame. So starting right off, Druid has one of the key passives in the endgame because you can't really get crit earlier on in the game. Now later there are potions, there's other ways to get crit. If Druid actually gets a crit, with this keystone passive, you're going to be able to refill all of your resource, and on top of the get extra crit. It is one of the most powerful things in the entire game to be able to have that, and that's the main reason why Druid is here. There's actually a lot of ways to sustain if you want to become like a permanent werebear. You can actually do that as well, which is still very, very good to go ahead and have access to. So Druid, with that key passive alone, it just makes them so much above and beyond. And a lot of times you've probably seen a lot of people talk about Druids is insane late game, and that's not just with the legendary powers, because every class has legendary powers that are going to make them way better. But because Druid specifically has the ability to get resource just instantly maxed out, there's not a class that has like that one button, give all your resource. Rogue can have it when you pop an ulti, but Twisting Blade is still very good. But nonetheless, Druid has got the most powerful like end game because of that passive alone. Next up, Barbarian has easy access to another legendary power. And on top of that, if you want to make a build that's all about your basic skill, Barbarian has the most weapons, so you can throw in more topazes, and you can actually scale different builds and have more potential with Barbarian, especially in the later stages of the game. And because they have shouts, they're going to be actually in the most demand. I would put Barbarian easily in the S tier for late game. Every team, every clans, they're going to want a Barbarian. Why? Because they literally buff the entire team. There's not a class that really has like good buffs. If you played, let's say, Monk in Diablo 3, you know how like they can buff your team. It's a really nice thing to have. Just Barbarians in general with the shouts actually help out a ton. And on top of that, being able to taunt the enemies, these are going to be one of the best classes to have in a group. Like if you are planning to play with other players and you want to be like the most in demand, out of all the classes, I would say Barbarian would probably be the favorite class to have in a group. So because of that reason, and on top of that, one of the key passives gives you the most insane multiplier. It's a times 135% damage. And on top of that, the reason why it's actually super powerful is because you're able to get all of your damage bonus activated on one whirlwind. And as long as you're channeling that one whirlwind and you're getting some sort of resource, all of your multiplier stays on that one specific whirlwind. And it probably will be one of the best skills in the game, because how it works, it's like you build up your damage and then your next core skill deals X amount bonus damage. Because the way Whirlwind works, if you're still channeling, counting that as that one skill gets that huge multiplier that's going to last for a very long time compared to other skills where it kind of expends that charge, if that makes any sense. Barbarian is definitely going to be one of the classes to look out for to actually one-shot. Speaking of one-shotting, Necromancer actually has insane potential. And I talked about this during the Keystone passive, as well as some of the legendary powers and uniques. Bone Spirit actually might be pretty game-breaking, and I haven't seen anyone talk about this, and this is going to be very insane. If you play Diablo 3, there was one patch in the game, I believe it was even on the PTR, where Bone Spirit actually could one-shot GR 150s, and you may be able to do insane amounts of damage with Necromancer. And the reason why is because you can get a massive multiplier with Bone Spirit. This is all Bone Spirit, by the way. The class is still good because of the Blood Mist thing that I've already talked about, but are you going to be able to realistically do that in the super far endgame? We'll have to wait and see. The reason why is because on paper, Bone Spirit actually has insane potential. So if we go to Necromancer and we go to one of the key passives towards the very end of the game, you have your Bone skills deal 1% increased damage for each point of essence you have above 50 upon cast. So that would mean you pop an ability and Bone Spirit will absorb all of your essence. It consumes all of it and does just a massive amount of damage because it does increase damage for each point of essence when you cast Bone Spirit. So what that means is if you're spending a lot of resource, you're going to do massive amounts of damage. You have another huge multiplier by increasing your essence. And on top of that, there is another legendary that makes it so depending on the travel distance, you will get increased damage with Bone Spirit. Now, look at this. This has no limit. Sometimes you'll look at certain things like with Barbarian, they actually nerfed a lot of things where it would say up to a maximum of 30% more, 50% more. This has no cap. Obviously, there's at some point, you're not going to be able to get infinite essence, right? But in theory, if you just get all essence, it's 1% increased damage. That multiplier, on top of getting another multiplier between the distance which it's cast, and you get that extra bonus, we could be looking at a Diablo 3 Bone Spirit where maybe you can go to the dungeon boss and literally one-shot it. So that has huge potential in the game, and I still think Necromancer is just overall a really solid class because of the Blood Mist, because that has not been nerfed. Unless it's getting nerfed day one, late game Necromancer will be very powerful. Plus, it's one of the classes that can curse everything and just make it so you're going to be able to get a lot of bonuses. So it's going to be nice to have a Necromancer in a party, specifically also because most people will probably want to play minions, and minions have always kind of been a fan favorite. And just because there's so many minions that exist, it kind of makes it a little bit easier for your team not to take damage because there's so many just, things just blocking damage. There's a lot of things, especially in the later stages of the game, where you'll just constantly see like a bunch of projectiles. And if these, little skeletons are just getting one-shotted, who cares if they're getting one-shotted when it prevents you from getting CC'd or whatever the case may be. I think Necromancer is going to be a very in-demand class. Next up over here, I want to talk about the Sorceress. Where would the Sorceress go over here? So in terms of the enchantments and the key passes, if you look at the key passes, I felt like most of them were actually quite weak. Now, the thing with Sorceress in terms of the late game over here, well, we're in late game here. So in terms of the late game for the Sorceress, one thing to mention is that the class is heavily reliant on cooldown. If you can get insane amounts of cooldown, we're talking far late into the game. I don't know if this is going to be like D2 where we're going to be able to upkeep everything, constantly spam skills, but Sorcerers can actually be one of the tankiest classes in the game. However, they did nerf the shield that you would get. They lessened the duration. I still think Sorceress is still going to be a pretty decent class because of Chain Lightning, but when you compare it with the amount of bonus extra damage that these other classes that can get, it's not even on the same playing field. But if you can get enough cooldown reduction, I would consider them A tier. However, because of the other classes, because of the way that they can get like an insane key passive, if you look at the, let's do this because this is kind of important. If we go to the Sorceress' like endgame passives, like what can we really scale? We get some extra burn damage, maybe you get a 20-30% multiplier, but when you compare a 20-30% multiplier again to what the Druid has, look at the Druids. Where's that one over here where we get that? Look at this. You have a lucky hit chance to restore all of your entire resource. All of your spirit just goes up, and then on top of that, you can make it so you have 5 seconds of guaranteed crits on top of restoring all your spirit. Like, this is just beyond levels of like OP-ness when you compare it to like Sorcerer. You get some damage. One of them doesn't even work for bosses. After, it's like you have extra chance to like freeze or something. There's the Crackling Wizards one. After freeze expires, you get to explode them for damage. You can't freeze the bosses, so then this one's just, it's a multiplier that's not even like very strong. This is why I would say, if you have the cooldown reduction, because of the way the shielding works, and because crackling energy and cooldown reduction can work with Sorcerers, it's going to be one of the harder classes, I'd say, to gear for. But if you can get there, I would consider probably in the A tier. But for most people, if you're like, I kind of want to be more of a casual, I would say the Sorceress is probably over here in the B tier. And the reason why is because it is so incredibly hard to get all of that cooldown reduction. It's not like D3 where you just throw in the diamond in the helm and just get some cool CDR in every piece of gear. to match up for it, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to gear up. And then lastly, we have the Rogue, which is a class that I feel like I have the most experience in, and I really enjoy playing the Rogue. However, it is very hard. I know a lot of people feel like Twisting Blades is OP, but wait till you just get to later stages of the game. We'll talk about and show more endgame gameplay very, very soon on the channel. Again, 30th, we're going to be dropping so much content here. As far as the Rogue goes, it's not an easy class to play, just as a heads up, because it does feel very squishy unless you're going flurry, and you can get things that give you barrier to go over health. You could do a lot of really cool things, but it's going to require a pretty decent amount of gear as well as actual skill to play. Rogue actually has one of the best mechanics for cooldown, but it is so hard to play. If you're a player that is really good at being able to go behind a target and being able to dodge certain things, and I'm only focusing in on melee Rogue because I think melee Rogue by far outclasses any ranged. If you're playing ranged, by the way, I would probably consider the Rogue a pretty awful class. And the reason why is because when you look at Twisting Blades and the way that it works with the amount of cooldown reduction that you can get, it's just on a completely different level. Even Flurry is really good for more defensive survivability and applying vulnerability to literally the entire screen. Rogue is actually terrible for ranged, I would say. If you're ranged, I would consider it in the C or maybe even more like the D tier compared to, like, again, the other classes and what you can get with Rogue, looking at what they can actually get in terms of like the late game. Most of these, by the way, even though you have to put 33 points in, these a lot of times scale later in the game a lot better. Most of these are kind of weak. The only one that's kind of nice is getting close quarters, where you get basically 20% extra attack speed and 20% increased damage against crowd control enemies. It's kind of nice to have both of those active, but again, when you compare it to full resource and 100% crit chance, it's not even close. And so for that reason, I'd probably put the Rogue in the B tier category. But if you are a really good player, I'd probably consider Rogue potentially over here. If you can get some extra cooldown, you could make the class very good, but the problem is it's not an easy class to play if you're playing melee, because you are a little bit more squishy when you compare Necromancer to just being able to take no damage, and on top of that, with, let's say, Druid, you have fortification, with Barb, you have fortification. You don't have access to that with the Rogue. You do potentially have a unique item in the game that can give you barrier, and then with that, the class actually becomes a lot stronger for melee, but you still have to be relatively up close, and your shrouds are going to go away. And once those shrouds are going to be going away, if you don't have the CDR to kind of keep that up, you're just going to be taking massive, big spikes of damage, and it's just going to feel kind of bad unless you're able to get a lot of defenses with the Rogue. And that's kind of where I would say the classes fall on this kind of sort of thing for the endgame. But anyways, that's my personal opinion on it. Let me know your guys' thoughts down below. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like on it, and let me know if you feel like any of the other classes should be bumped up or bumped down. Very, very curious to know your thoughts. But anyways, check the pinned comment if you'd like to see more Diablo content. Subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more stuff coming out very soon. Like I said, on the 30th, big stuff coming very soon on the channel. Take care. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.